First of all, welcome. We're delighted to have you here today. My name is Erin Leonard. I am the program manager for the National Charter Schools Conference. And before I introduce our esteemed presenter, I'd just like to take care of a couple housekeeping items. First of all, if you're looking for additional resources for school leaders, educators, and parents, the National Alliance has compiled a number of COVID-19 specific resources on our website. Visit covid.publiccharters.org for more information. Additionally, the National Alliance will be hosting a number of helpful webinars throughout the course of the next few weeks. Visit publiccharters.org/webinars to see our upcoming offerings. Now, don't worry, today's webinar will be recorded. We'll share the link with you via our website in just a few days. All of you will remain on mute throughout the webinar, but we do still want you to engage with us. We'll ask you to raise your hand a few times to give us a little bit of feedback. First of all, for those of us joining on Zoom, you'll also notice a Q&A icon. This is critical this is where you should put your questions. We will go ahead and pose them to Sal after his presentation. We'll have an elongated Q&A during this presentation, so we're really looking forward to your questions. So let's go ahead and practice. For our Zoom participants, go ahead and hit the raise your hand button if you've ever used Khan Academy before, either as part of your curriculum or in the recent weeks while you're moving to remote learning. We'll give you a few seconds. So again, raise your hand is for anyone joining us via Zoom in the bottom right of the platform. If you've ever engaged with Khan Academy before, used any of their resources, go ahead and raise your hand. Wow, okay, I'm seeing a lot of hands going up, hundreds of hands being raised, and I'm not surprised. I'm glad to see so many of you are utilizing the great resources of Khan Academy, and I'm sure you're gonna learn even more today. It's with my great pleasure to introduce our presenter, Sal Khan, founder of Khan Academy, a nonprofit organization with the mission of providing a free, world-class education for anyone, anywhere. Khan Academy's content and mastery learning platform has over 99 million registered users from all over the world. It's been localized into over 30 languages. Khan Academy is the leader in remote learning, and Sal is truly an expert on how to teach and engage students via video and remote learning. We are thrilled to have him here today, so please join me in welcoming Khan Academy founder and two-time National Charter Schools Conference keynote, Sal Khan. Hi, Sal.
Hey, Erin. Thanks for that very generous introduction.
So happy you could join us.
No, definitely. And thanks for everyone for joining this. I know in this time of social distancing, things like this are not quite a full substitute, obviously, for being in the same room together, but they help a lot in ways to feel connected. And I feel that personally too. Otherwise, I'm just kind of by myself. You know, I think one of the topics that I'm sure we're going to talk about today, and I definitely want to make this as interactive as possible. So whatever mechanisms we have for asking questions, feel free to start putting them in there. And I've even told the moderators, you know, push the questions as far as you want to go. There's really no question that's out of bounds. But one of the questions that a lot of folks I'm sure are going to be thinking about and we'll discuss is how do we do things in this virtual world while not losing some of the humanity, some of the connection? And I think one of the simple answers, I'll maybe give longer answers later if y'all ask it, is make it as interactive as possible. So I'm going to try to make this session as interactive as possible, given our constraints. But I'll start with a little bit of background. I saw when folks were raising hands, I have another screen here, that's what I'm looking at. When folks were raising hands, that about half of y'all seemed like y'all used Khan Academy or might be familiar with it. I'll give you a little bit of background on Khan Academy itself, and then a little bit of background on what the last couple of weeks have been like, at least from our point of view. And then I'd love to just open it up and talk about what the world we live in could look like, what the future could look like, how things might be different. So if you rewind back to 2004, I was at the time working as my original background was in tech and in math, but at this time I found myself, I was working as an analyst at an investment firm, and I had just gotten married. I was in Boston, and I had family visiting me from New Orleans. And it just came out of conversation that my 12-year-old cousin Nadia was having trouble in math. So I offered to tutor her when she went back to New Orleans. She agreed. So I started doing remote tutoring back in 2004. I think a lot of us are now re-experiencing remote tutoring now. And it was similar. There was obviously no Zoom or Google Meet back then, but we would just do it over a phone. And we were using things like Instant Messenger to be able to see each other's writing. And slowly but surely, Nadia, who at seventh grade, she had taken a placement test the previous year. She had bombed it because of unit conversion. And so she was put into a slower math class. Slowly but surely, she got unit conversion. Slowly but surely, she got caught up with her class. And she even then got a little ahead of her class. And at that point, I became what I call a tiger cousin. And I called up her school and I said, I really think Nadia Rahman should retake that placement exam from last year. And I'm sure y'all really appreciate calls like this. And they said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm her cousin." And they actually let her. And that same Nadia, who only a few months ago was labeled as kind of a slower track math student, was then placed into the advanced track. And so that was a pretty meaningful thing for me, because it was a way for me to engage with my cousin who was across the country. Just a little bit of intervention on my part really helped her. And so I kept going. I started working with her younger brothers as well. And so over the next roughly year, 18 months, kept working with them. And the small investment firm I was working for, we moved out to Northern California. My boss's wife became a professor at Stanford Law School. But more relevant to this story, word spread around my family that free tutoring was going on. And I found myself every day after work for me, after school for my cousins, tutoring 10, 15 cousins, family, friends, on a whole series of topics. And one thing that I saw in those early days, and I'm sure many of you educators, I'm not telling you something that you don't know, I saw the reasons why my cousins were having difficulty wasn't because they weren't capable. It wasn't because they that the subject matter was difficult. It was because they were approaching that subject matter, even though that they had pretty big gaps from previous school years. So they might be a pre-algebra student trying to understand, I don't know, exponents, but they're still a little shaky on some of their multiplication, or they're trying to do algebra that has some fractions and negative numbers in it, and they're shaky on those things. And so having that tech background, I said, well, maybe I could write a little tool for them so they can get as much practice and as much feedback as they need. So I wrote a thing where they can get questions, and then I, as their tutor, their teacher, I could monitor their progress remotely. And that was the first Khan Academy. It had nothing to do with videos. And it was about a few months later, this is like November 2006, one of my family friends, I was showing off the software I had written at a dinner party. You could imagine I'm a really fun guest. And while I was showing that, he suggested, his name's Zuli, give him credit. He said, "Well, Sal, this is all very cool, but how are you scaling your actual sessions, your actual lectures with your cousins?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's hard, Zuli. I have 15 cousins. They're all at different levels. Some are showing up one week and they weren't there the previous week. I'm having to repeat the same thing over and over again." And he's like, "Well, I have an idea. Why don't you record some of your lessons as videos and upload them onto YouTube for your family?" And this isn't me just joking around. I initially thought it was just a horrible idea. YouTube is for cats playing piano. It's not for serious math. But I went home that weekend. I got over the idea that it wasn't my idea. And I found myself in a situation that I think a lot of teachers are finding themselves in right now. It's like, okay, maybe Zuli was onto something. How do I do this? And this was back before cell phones had good cameras and et cetera. So I was like, well, there's got to be a way to capture a screen and my voice at the same time. And I did a Google search, and it turns out there's something called screen capture software. And so I just went from there, and I started making content. I started telling my cousins, "Hey, why don't you watch this ahead of time, especially while you're doing the exercises, the software that I've been making for them. And that way, when we get on the phone, we can go a little bit deeper." And after about a month of that, I asked them for feedback, and they famously told me that they like me better on YouTube than in person. And it's a little bit, it's a not non-intuitive feedback, but it is when you put yourself in a learner's shoes. When you're trying to learn something, no matter how non-judgmental your cousin, your tutor, your parent, your teacher is trying to be, it can be a little bit stressful. They ask, "Wait, why does A lead to B?" And the well-wisher says, well, it's you know, because of C, remember? And you feel pressure to say, oh yeah, yeah, of course. And then 2 hours later, you're trying to replicate that thinking, and you're like, what did they say? Why does C even relate to A or B? And now they could get as much they could repeat the lessons. If they were in algebra and they forgot some of their basic elementary school math, uh, they didn't have to feel embarrassed about it. They could just do it. There was no judgment or even fear of judgment. But they weren't saying they didn't appreciate me in their life. If anything, it up leveled our conversations when we got on the phone. They were able to go deeper. I was able to surface things that the software, the videos could have never surfaced, where I was just realizing, oh, the reason why they're stuck is there's something else going on in their life, or they're just approaching this the wrong way, or whatever it might be, or I was able to unpack some of their misconceptions. So I kept going. It soon became clear that people who are not my cousins were accessing this content. Initially, you know, the comments would come in on YouTube. They were just some simple thank yous. Even that I thought was a big deal. Most of the comments on YouTube are not thank you. They're a little bit edgier. But then I started getting comments from folks saying, this is the reason I was able to pass my algebra class, or I'm deployed in Iraq and I want to go back to college when I get back, and I've been able to use these resources while I'm deployed. And so you can imagine that was a pretty powerful experience for me. You fast forward to 2009, there were about 50 or 100,000 people using Khan Academy on a monthly basis. And I frankly had trouble focusing on my day job. So I sat down with my wife. We looked at our finances. We were saving up for a house, and our first son had just been born. But there was a sense that, you know, if we set this up as a not-for-profit, the social return on investment here could be large, and hopefully someone would recognize it. So I quit my day job and I took that plunge. And I think anytime you do anything entrepreneurial, you have to start with that delusional optimism. You have to assume surely the world, the universe will conspire to make this true because it seems like a good idea. But you do, I think in most cases, quickly realize that maybe you were a little bit delusional. and so I was talking to some philanthropist foundations, and at first it was promising, but after a few months, nothing had really materialized. And then it was about 10 months in, and this was an incredibly stressful 10 months where I was doubting every aspect of what the decisions I had made, you know, our costs. I was digging into our savings, about $5,000 a month. It was quickly not becoming a down payment on a house. And it was around that period in May of 2010 that we had our first significant donation come in at $10,000, and it was off of PayPal. I never met the person. I see who it is. Her name was Ann Doer. She was local. She was down the street from where I was, and I immediately emailed her and I said, dear Ann, thank you so much for this incredibly generous donation. It's the largest donation that Khan Academy has ever received. If we were a physical school, you would now have a building named after you. And Ann immediately replied back and said, well, I use this with my daughters. I've been using it myself. I had some content on the financial crisis. I'd love to meet and talk about how we could coordinate or what you're doing. And so I met her, and over lunch at an Indian buffet restaurant in downtown Palo Alto, Ann asked, what's your goal here? And I told her, look, when I filled out the paperwork with the IRS to be a not-for-profit, I filled, there's a part that asks you your mission, and I filled out free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. And Ann's reaction was, well, that's ambitious. How do you see yourself doing that? And I was very clear. I said, no, you know, it's a mission statement. I don't think I'm going to be able to just check it off this weekend and then move on to healthcare or something. It's a big mission, and it's not just going to be Khan Academy. And obviously back then, Khan Academy was just me. It's not just going to be me. It's going to be in partnership with schools, with teachers. Arguably, this is the mission statement of public schools: free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. But I think there's elements that this Khan Academy project could add to it, where we could, you know, I showed her, she knew about the videos, but I showed her the software. I was like, the real learning happens when students struggle with concepts. They get practice, they get feedback. Videos are nice, but not the core. And ideally, this happens in conjunction with incredible teachers. So we can empower teachers with data that exists in other industries, where they can know in real time exactly where their kids are. You know, historically, teachers get the test, the formative assessment, but you kind of have to move on oftentimes after that. But now they could get that real-time information, understand where they can unblock kids, use class time for more social interaction. I showed her the usage count, how it was growing exponentially. I showed her the comments from folks around the world. I showed, you know, I said, I want to translate this into all of the major languages of the world. and across subjects and grades from pre-K through college. And Anne said, that's ambitious. And it seems like you've made a surprising amount of progress. I only have one question. How are you supporting yourself? And in as proud of a way as possible, I said, I'm not. And so Anne kind of processes that, and we part ways. And about 20 minutes later, I'm driving into my driveway and I get a text message from Anne, and it says, you really need to be supporting yourself. I've just wired you $100,000. And so, as you can imagine, that was a good day, a little bit. And that was the beginning. I in my mind, I consider that the beginning of, at least when I started to realize, wow, this Khan Academy thing could be a real thing. And you fast forward, it just more and more people just stepped up to help support this. We're still predominantly funded philanthropically, but by 2010, we were able to get office space, start hiring up a team to do what we're doing now. And if you fast forward to today, as was introduced by Aaron, it's grown at a scale and a speed far faster than I could have even imagined, even when I was delusionally optimistic. But we also realize, as much as it's grown, there's so much more to do. And it's much more than me now. There's 200 full-time folks at Khan Academy. These are educators, engineers, researchers, content creators. There are thousands of people around the world who volunteered for Khan Academy to translate things like that. We've had hundreds of thousands of people donate even $1 to Khan Academy, which helps us do the work we do. And fast forwarding to the crisis, the situation where we're finding ourselves in, about 6 weeks ago, maybe a month ago, when we started seeing our traffic spike in Asia first, and then when it started in California, was one of the first states where we saw the outbreak and where people started talking about school closures. We realized, it's one of those situations where you kind of turn to the left and you kind of turn to the right, and you're like, I guess, we got to step up here. This is our duty. This, as a nonprofit, we never could have foreseen this situation. I could have never foreseen the situation we're all in right now 10 years ago when I was in my walk-in closet. But if anyone, if there's anything that can help, it's a solution that's free, a solution that's non-commercial, that's universally accessible on devices, that can work when school is in session, but then kids and teachers can transition if schools need to be closed. That can provide data to teachers to understand, to track the progress of their students, and that can work across subjects and grades. And so that's when we started essentially having like a war room of like, what more can we do to support parents and students and teachers? And so we started doing parent and teacher webinars. We started doing a daily homeroom, which I do every day at 12 Pacific time. And we started releasing things like, what could a daily schedule look like for students of different age groups? And what we saw is a lot of that stuff, people were just hungry. A lot of the information that was going out was like, here's 500 resources that might be useful for you. And you can imagine a parent or a teacher just finding out that as of Monday, schools are going to be closed. That's not that useful. It's much more useful to say, okay, calm down, not a big deal. Just start simple. Hey, if you can do an hour of this, an hour of math, an hour of reading, that's a great start. And then here's what a day could look like if you want to layer on more. Here's different resources that are free, et cetera, not just Khan Academy, but others. And that, I think, resonated a lot with folks. And, just to catch us up to where we are now, traffic is up about 3x from what it typically is. And we're just trying to keep up with what's going on. And it's an interesting situation. I don't think I'm telling y'all things you don't know. In California and in many states, it looks like school will be out through the end of the school year. And then obviously summer, and so you have 5 months of no physical school, and this is going to lead to serious issues where the disparity is going to grow. There's kids who don't even have online access, which has all sorts of issues. But then even amongst those that do, they're going to engage to different degrees. Different districts, different schools have been able to support to different degrees through this crisis. And then there's question marks about, what if the virus comes back next school year? What happens there? So I'll stop talking. I want to make this as interactive as possible, but I think that gets all of y'all up to speed on kind of where Khan Academy, our history, and where we are in the crisis right now. But I'd love to take questions literally about anything.
Fantastic, because they're coming in. We've got a lot of questions. So all of you, keep them coming. We're so happy to see it. First question Do you have any examples of schools that are really ahead of the curve in remote learning?
Yeah, it's I'll give you two examples that I'm close to, and one is, I mean, I guess it's a little bit, I don't want it to be promotional, but I'm the chair of a school called Conrad School that we started 6 years ago, and that's where my children go. And I can't take credit for it. I got to say the teachers there and the administration there, I'm on the board, but I'm not involved on the day-to-day basis. They really did a good job of, especially my 11 and my 11 and my 8-year-old. What I think has worked out well for them is even before the schools closed, even before people could have even predicted that schools would close, the school put a big emphasis on student agency. So even when school is in session, a lot was put on like, hey student, what are your goals? What are you hoping to achieve today? What are you hoping to achieve this week? And there, of course, are breakouts and supports, and there's a lot of human to human interaction in the school when it's physically there. And then there's check-ins with teachers around, hey, have you met your goals for this week? Have you met your goals for this day? And so I think that muscle, when the school had to virtualize with like 3 days notice, they were able to just kind of carry on, because especially the kids who are at least 7 or 8 years old, all the way up to obviously the 16, 17, 18 year olds, they already understood that paradigm of like, I shouldn't sit and wait to be told what to do. I can look at a list of things to do, and I can accomplish them over the day with some check-ins, with some accountability. And I think and they're evolving too. They're trying to figure out things on the fly as well. But I think that helped the school because they already had I guess you could say, a mastery learning kind of philosophy. And they already, this notion of check-ins, I think transferred quite well to the Zoom world. So I've been impressed there. My 5-year-old, I think kindergarten is especially difficult. That's where I think, speaking as a parent, it's been even more of a burden on the parent, because it's very hard for, no matter how incredible, and we have some incredible teachers, how incredible they are, if the 5-year-old is over a Zoom connection, it's much harder to regulate that. But I will say, even the 5-year-olds and the 6-year-olds, as they've gotten used to the new normal, as the school and the parents have tried to put some consistency, they've stepped up. They've stepped up too. So we've learned that actually students of all ages are capable of more if we expect it. Another group that I would say is much larger and a much more complex situation. We've always worked closely with the Long Beach Unified School District. And I've been in touch with them lately over the last couple of weeks, trying to figure out ways that we could help them even more. And they've been doing a really great job. They're a large public school district with all the issues that everyone has been reading about. But they've been really pushing, they've been doing massive trainings about how do you run sessions on Zoom or Google Meet. They've been doing, I think, fairly, they, as a large district, it's necessarily has to take more time, but they've been doing really good things like distributing Chromebooks so that they can ensure all their students have access, things like that. But I've been impressed on both fronts, and we're continuing to hear about more. I talked to a teacher, Tim Vandenberg, who teaches in Hesperian, California. Similar idea. He was always doing mastery learning. So the kids were learning at their own time and pace, with him there to unblock them, to hold them accountable to their goals. And so as they virtualized, he hasn't missed a beat. He's continuing in that same framework.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that. Building on the question about preschool learning, I'm seeing a lot of questions about early childhood education remotely. We've got a preschool teacher from a charter school in DC that would like to know more about delivering remote education to people pre-K 3 to first grade.
Yeah, and I will. That's a great question, and I will give a disclaimer that is not where my expertise is. If I claim expertise in anything, in the early days of Khan Academy, or even up to a few years ago, people always said, "Hey, with this mission, when are we going to be doing early learning?" And I used to give folks the same answer, which is, "Hey, that's not my expertise, but we should do it." And I used to always say, "Hey, if we do it, we should do it at least as good as the Duck Duck Moose team." For those of y'all who don't know Duck Duck Moose, it was this husband and wife couple that back in 2008, 2009, when the iPhone came out and the iPad and things like that, they were the first to create, I would say, some of the quality apps for young children that were both fun and educational, and had us all like blown away that like a 3-year-old could manipulate things on a device. kind of unlocking Pandora's box, as we've all learned. But they've, my kids grew up with their apps. Like, that was the only screen time. Obviously, you have to be careful with screen time. But then I was like, okay, if I need a half an hour, if I have my kids on the Duck Duck Moose apps, I don't feel so guilty. And and it was kind of this strange phenomenon about 3 years ago. I saw on my calendar that the Duck Duck Moose team wanted to meet. And I'm like, why do they want to meet? But I'm happy to meet them because I have a lot of respect for them. And they came to Khan Academy and they did this presentation and I'm like, look, I know all about you. And I showed them my phone. I had all their apps. I'm like, why are you here? And they're like, well, we're getting offers to be acquired. They're a for-profit company, venture backed. And, but they're like, that's not why we started this company. It was a family project. We started it the same way you started it for your cousin. We started it for our own children. We talked to our investors and they would be very happy if we could donate our company to Khan Academy. I was like, what's going on? This is some type of someone playing a prank on me. And it was real, which is, one of those things that you don't expect to happen in the world, but it shows people really stepping up to do right by the world. And so the Duck Duck Moose became Khan Academy Kids. And what we brainstormed, and they are experts on early learning. And they've been working with folks at Stanford and early learning and things like that. And the brainstorm was, okay, right now a lot of apps, including the legacy Duck Duck Moose apps, they focus on one fairly narrow aspect of what it means to be an early learner. What if we were able to create an app that kind of truly adapts to the student, can start them just as they're learning their letters, their numbers, colors, things like that, but grows with them, personalizes for them, works on social emotional learning, has books in it, et cetera, could really level the playing field. Because as long as someone has even a low-cost smartphone, if they have that app, it's free. They could have access to hundreds of books, interactive videos, really high-quality materials. And so that's what we set out to build, and it got released about 1.5 years ago. And it's so that's my first answer to your question is, look at Khan Academy Kids and look at the resources. If you search Khan Academy Kids, not only will you find the app, which is free, non-commercial, you'll find resources that they're doing. They're doing daily circle time and stuff like that over a live stream. So I would definitely engage in that crowd. Above and beyond that, I do think that age group is one of the hardest to do, especially in this time of social distancing. Even before the social distancing, we were saying, look, Khan Academy Kids, we believe is a high quality app. There's good efficacy studies, but ideally, if a student does 20 minutes on their own, 30 minutes in a day, not the end of the world. But ideally, there's a loved one that they're sitting in their lap, they're sitting next to, they're working on it together, so you don't lose that human connection. But that's my best advice. Some of the stuff we're trying to figure out at home. My wife gets the credit here. She's been more effective with our 5-year-old than I have been. Is kind of putting a checklist on our. We have a whiteboard that we got, and we're putting checklists for all of our kids. To do. And so, yeah, they're stepping up. And, some of the fun stuff is they're getting very excited about stuff that we'd actually never allowed them to do before. So today, our 5-year-old is going to be mopping. He's very excited about that. And I'm excited that he's excited about mopping. So anyway, that's my best advice. And obviously try to get time outside as much as possible if it's feasible and things like that. But I wish I had better answers.
No, that's super helpful. And I see that a number of our users actually do use Khan Academy for early childhood scholars. They love it. And they love Khan Academy Kids. And a couple of questions about it, actually. Will it be available to have a dashboard, much like Khan Academy, or the ability to send lessons and monitor as an educator?
Yes. It is on their radar, on the team's radar. I don't know when it will exist. I mean, it might. It's not going to exist in the next couple of months, but I'm hopeful that over the next few years, because one of the things that we were surprised by when we created the app, we assumed it was going to be disproportionately downloaded by parents, but almost half of the downloads were schools and teachers. And so we realized, there is a very real use case around using this in kindergarten, first, and it goes now. It starts in the pre-K Head Start standards, but it goes through the kindergarten and now first grade Common Core standards in reading, writing, math, social emotional learning, which there isn't a lot of standards on Common Core on social emotional learning, but it goes through all of those things. And so yeah, it's we hope that that functionality can be out sooner than later, so it can be better leveraged by schools.
That's great. It looks like you've got a willing audience ready for it. A lot of questions here about tailoring content for special ed students or students that may have English as a second language. Do you have any tips on how to engage those particular demographics?
Yeah, once again, I will give my disclaimer. I am not an expert on either front, but I will still give give thoughts. Um, Special education, obviously, there's a huge variety of situations that fall under special education. I think we have not, and we used to get this question even before the school closures happened. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence, not real robust research, that for certain types of learning needs, Khan Academy, we've heard stories of it working. Now, once again, you can't, I don't know how robust the evidence is, but I've heard for students with dyslexia, attention deficit disorder, hyper ADHD, the ability to work at their own pace, pause, repeat lessons if necessary, get immediate feedback. The students on the Asperger spectrum, we've also heard that some connected really well with it. So I think there's a there. I think all of these students, my gut sense, are struggling more in this period of social distancing, because when those old anecdotal stories I used to hear usually were in the context of a parent or a teacher next to the student, working with them very closely. And now if they're distant from their teacher, at least physically distant, might be a little bit more difficult. I would say my only belief or idea, and once again, I am not an expert on this area, is interactions like this on Zoom, Google Hangouts, Skype, FaceTime, whatever. The more you can have, the better. I think it's not just for academics now; it's for mental health now, for people to stay connected, and when doing it, to make it as interactive as possible. I think it was always the best practice in classrooms to make it as interactive as possible, to make students do the work, not to just not give a broadcast lecture. But I think that is true even more so right now. So, I've been working with some teachers on thinking through how they can virtualize their classes. And, I think some of the constraints that teachers have placed on themselves before, which are important constraints, if they loosen them, that might actually help. And what I'm talking about is, some of the teachers I was working with, they're very good at planning very robust lesson plans. And they're like, okay, I have 55 minutes tomorrow. Here are the 3 standards I'm going to cover. And here's my very, very robust lesson plan. But I think in the world of when you're doing it on Zoom or on Skype or something like that, if those lesson plans sometimes don't have the degree of interactivity that you might need. And also those lesson plans run longer than might be reasonable on something like a Skype session. And so it was almost like, and who am I? But I'm like, I worked with some of I was like, I kind of gave them permission. I was like, no, just have a whiteboard here and write maybe an example problem and just make it very interactive. Like, hey, Aaron, what do you think is the next step? And you say, oh, you think is that? Well, why do you think that? And just make it continuously. And then as soon as you do that example problem, you're done. Like, no worries. And I think that lowered the stress level of the teachers. They're like, oh, that's pretty straightforward. I just literally take out a whiteboard and I can just write a problem down. I was like, yeah, that's amazing. That was an amazing interaction. And when I saw that their stress level went down. They actually were more comfortable. The interactions with the students were much better. The students were able to feel more comfortable and opened up a little bit more. So anyway, long answer. I mean, that's not just for special ed. For English language learners, once again, I'm also not an expert there. We do have, depending on the language, we do, like Spanish, for example, there's a fully Spanish Khan Academy. So I think that is one outlet that folks could use. But I think the same advice, just the more interaction that you have in forums like this, the better it's going to be for those students, especially the English language. I'm just modeling it in my head. If you're in a household where people are not speaking English, for a lot of the English language learners, school was the place where they got that interaction so that they were on that English language learning curve faster. And now if they're socially distanced, they're going to get less of that. And a lot of that learning would happen informally with their friends and other things. And so I think it's even more important, I would guess, to get some of that interaction, but still be supported potentially in the language, in their mother tongue, so to speak.
Absolutely. Well, that's extremely helpful. And, you know, speaking of keeping students and teachers engaged via video, do you have any advice on really how to keep that engagement going? I know you were just saying plenty of ideas with whiteboards and genuine interactions, but do you have any other tips on how to continue that engagement, keep kids really learning, enthused, excited while they're, you know, looking at Zoom or whatever?
Yeah, I think, and I'm experimenting with it too. I'm actually running some experiments where I'm teaching a few classes with a small, it actually takes me back. Y'all heard my story. It takes me back to 2004. I wish I had Zoom back then to be able to teach my cousins. That would have made things a lot. Although maybe it was a blessing that I didn't, because it forced, the Khan Academy videos, famously, you don't see my face or anything. Because that's it was a limitation that I had back then. I didn't have a video camera, but in some ways it made it more intimate. So I would say, yeah, don't worry too much about the production value. The important thing is make it as interactive as possible and be available for the students. And a lot of times it could be zero planning. It could be, you see a lot of your students are having trouble in some concept, and you just say, hey, look, I'm available at 2 o'clock Eastern time here's a Zoom link, here's a Google Meet link, whatever. I'm here to answer your questions. That's it. And I'm going to be there, it's office hours. I'm there for 30 minutes. I think stuff like that makes a huge, huge, huge difference, even for the kids who aren't showing up, because they know you're available. They know if they feel a little less disconnected. So that's and then obviously when you're on it, you can have a whiteboard, you could share your tablet. If you have a tablet screen, I have a little, I can show y'all, that's the tablet that, I do the videos on. You could have something like that. That's a little bit higher tech. You could set up a phone camera. So it's, pointed down at a piece of paper and just do something like that. Yeah. But the more interactive it is, the better. The way I think about it is, if it's not interactive, it might as well be a video. Simple answer. Yeah.
That's a good way to think about it, honestly. And I know we're getting some tips from our chat box as well, that a lot of teachers are finding it helpful to pre-record their content, kind of the flipped classroom model, have their students watch the videos and then host the live classroom over webinar. So that's also working as well, the flipped classroom model, it seems. And have you seen anything with that?
Yeah, flipped classroom is something that we've kind of gotten associated with over the years. I gave a TED talk back in 2011, and I was saying, I was getting letters from teachers saying, hey, you gave a decent lesson on photosynthesis. I, as a teacher, don't want to, I have scarce class time. Now I can have my kids watch it at their own time and pace. And when they come to class, I can have more interactivity. I can do more problem solving. We can do a lab, whatever. And then, we said, then what? They flipped it. They what used to happen at home is happening at school, the problem solving, and what used to happen at school, the lectures, is now happening at home. And I think it's always been a best practice, well before Khan Academy, arguably Socrates did a flipped classroom. Your humanities seminars were like, read the book and then we come to class and we will discuss. But I think especially in science classes and math classes, it's normally been the other way around, that class time is when you get the lecture and then you go home and you do the practice. So I think that's always been the best practice, when human beings are in the room, to leverage that interaction. Now in this world we're in, it's even more operative, because it's very clear that if I were to just lecture to everyone, like I kind of did the first 20 minutes, my apologies, but if I were to just lecture to, that could have been a video, that first 20 minutes of me talking very easily. In fact, how do you know it wasn't? it could have been a video, and so why not make it a video? Because then it scales, then you can just share it as many times as you need it. And what's really valuable is the feeling that people are able to interact with each other, and that we can dig a little bit deeper and get those next order questions, get that interaction.
Absolutely. Very helpful. Thank you. We've got a question here from Nina Reese. Some districts that are trying to offer virtual learning opportunities are noticing that some students are simply not showing up to class. So how do you answer a question around the suitability of online learning for households that perhaps don't have an active adult around to help students navigate online learning?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'm running an experiment with a school district where we're trying to set up like a scheduling mechanism where students can say what they need help in, and then teachers can say can schedule video conferencing sessions to support them. And we've seen that phenomenon for sure of like, wow, free help, but the kids aren't showing up. I think there's a lot of layer. I think there's a negative, and then there maybe is a silver lining. The negative is, yeah, we have to figure out how to get these kids to engage. And to your point, especially if let's say their parent is an essential worker and is an ICU nurse, for example, I'm just making so the parent's not even home. That kid needs even more than even the academics. That student needs some interaction, but for various reasons might just, hopefully let's assume the internet access is an issue. So I think there's that, but even if they have it, for some reason, they're not showing up. I think this is a new frontier. Schools are going to have to think about, are there some kind of accountability mechanisms, hey, you got to attend a few of these every week, et cetera, et cetera. The flip side of it is, putting kind of a healthy tension into it. At our lab school, we had kind of this phenomenon. This was like last year, pre-closures, where the math team experimented with, hey, kids are learning at their own time and pace. What if the math team scheduled kind of times where the kids could come and get help? And they noticed a phenomenon that sometimes kids weren't coming. And the team asked itself a really powerful question as well. Maybe in certain cases, they weren't finding it as valuable as we thought when we were forcing them to come. So I think that, puts a good pressure on both sides. So there's important to put pressure on the students to say, look, you need this, because a lot of them do need it and they need to come. And I think the accountability mechanisms are going to be interesting to see. And we would love ideas, I think your network is a great place to share those ideas. But I think there's also another network. There's another question of, how do we make sure that we are really meeting those students' needs where they are right now? And what norms can we put in, and what kind of accountability structures can we put in to make sure of that? And then also, how do we connect with the parents to do it as well? So yeah, those are all open questions, but as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think we're going to collectively try to figure out some of this stuff over the next couple of months.
I think you're right about that. We've got a question here from a middle school math teacher, Christina DeBianchi. She says, as a middle school math teacher, I anticipate this pandemic will create foundational issues for our students going into high school math. What do you suggest for teachers to keep students invested in learning math when it's not required to attend Zoom lessons or even complete Khan Academy assignments? And also, do you think blended learning will help students next year if they are promoted to high school without this firm understanding of middle school math?
Yeah, that question is the core of everything. As many of y'all know, or probably all of y'all know, 70% of kids, when they go to community college, have to take remedial math, which is essentially middle school math. And so what's happening, at least the hypothesis, is these kids promoted year after year, they have gaps in their knowledge. And if you don't know your negative numbers well, or you don't even know your arithmetic well, I've walked into high school classes where it's clear that the kids don't know their multiplication tables. The algebra, the geometry is you're going through the motions, and then you get to community college and you have to retake pre-algebra, and even there you might struggle. And so I think this was an issue even before the COVID crisis. And I think it's going to your point, it's going to be exacerbated because of it. We talked to some of our assessment partners, and it looks like they've been able to statistically look at what the learning loss is over the summers. And then they've been able to extrapolate, well, what's it likely to be this year, where you have 2 less months of school and 2 more months of vacation, not vacation, but not school. And it could be a year of lost learning. And that's on top of whatever gaps the kids already had. And so we are trying to promote the idea of, let's use the next 5 months to keep learning. Let's not just view it, let's not time box ourselves by the traditional school year. And, actually, I think that's a silver lining, because if we can get that habit this year, that the summer is a time for learning, then we should do it all future summers, even if hopefully, the virus hasn't been eradicated. And all the summers should be, that's where you do your independent learning. That's where you're able to fill in your gaps, et cetera. I think there's an account of, and if we can get the students to put in that, let's call it 30 minutes a day, 45 minutes a day, whatever it is, some reasonable amount every day. And we have that in some of our schedules. I'm confident that a student, if they were in parallel, let's say they're a 6th grader, they're finishing up their 6th grade year right now. we say, okay, between now and August, I want you to finish the 6th grade course on Khan Academy and try to get at least, do what you can, but try to get at least 60-70% on it. And simultaneously, because we know you probably have some gaps, try to do the arithmetic course on Khan Academy and try to get that to 60 or 70%. If the students did engage 30 minutes, 40 minutes a day, even 3 days a week, something like that, I'm very confident they're gonna really be prepared going into 7th grade. I actually think they'll be more prepared than historically prepared for 7th grade. The question is, how do we motivate the kids to do that? And that's where I think the educators here are so key. I think there's a couple of layers. If the school could provide some accountability, some carrots and sticks, that's useful. Like, hey, if you really want to do this in 7th grade, you got to do this over the summer. If they can keep the accountability mechanisms going through the year, where we say, instead of everyone putting pressure on themselves to get everything figured out in the next 2 months, say, look, we're just going to spread it out, give everyone breathing room, including the teachers. The teachers don't have to do everything right now, 5 days a week. Like, you're just going to go through. It could be like do 2-3 days a week where you're made available from now to the summer, and there to answer questions, there to sit, even if you're able to do a 5-minute a week with each student and just talk about what their goals were for the week and how it could, that makes a huge difference. But that's my best idea of how to prevent this. And in theory, this should be happening every year, but it's an even more pronounced need this year. As we get into the school year, I think you're going to have kids, as we talked about, huge. Normally you have a variance, and it's going to be that much bigger this coming back to school. And so I think the first month of school is going to have to look fundamentally different than it historically looked. Although, once again, I think it could always look like this, where the first month could be that, hey, everyone master. I'm just using Khan Academy as an example. There are other ways you might be able to do this, but get mastery on 6th grade, right? For the next 3-4 weeks. And if you know it, you can do things on Khan Academy, like take the course challenges, the unit tests, where if you know it, you can actually get your mastery in a few hours. But if you don't know it, then you work on the things that you don't know, and you need to. I think something like that, or tell all the students, entering 7th grade. I'm just picking on this age group, but this could be true for any age group. Finish the arithmetic course on Khan Academy going into 7th grade. That goes all the way up through the negative numbers, the basics that you're supposed to know. So I think those are the types of techniques that could help us navigate. We're exploring doing things like doing better diagnostics and stuff to help teachers and parents and students as we get into back to school as well, if they're not able to do the summer work.
Yeah. We're fantastic. And we're getting a lot of compliments about how much Khan Academy has been a huge help to schools as they move to this virtual transition, but also before that, the resources were fantastic. They've been incredible training for instructional staff and school-wide. So lots of thank yous for providing these great resources. And a question that's come up a lot. Is there a way to have an admin account setting or something in Khan Academy so that we can view the whole school's progress? We have a lot of school administrators really wanting to see that.
Yeah, so yes and no. So a lot of folks are familiar with the teacher accounts, and they can put a roster of teachers, and a group of students can have as many teachers as they like. So I could have multiple coaches if I'm a student, and then a teacher can obviously have multiple students. We don't have a kind of a just out of the box kind of push button school view or district view for Khan Academy. We have been partnering with districts and charter networks over the last year to do things like bulk rostering and having school-wide or district-wide dashboards. So for example, Long Beach has a district-wide dashboard. Las Vegas, who we partner with, has a district-wide dashboard. So they can monitor not just at a school level, they have that at the school level as well, but they can monitor at the district level what the engagement is and where it is. So I hope, this whole crisis has definitely lit the fire under us to be a little bit, to get that out there even faster. The difficulty thing is, I would have never thought that rostering was such a complex thing until we tried to do it. And so I'm sure everyone, a lot of administrators here have like, I could have told you that. But that's I think the trick is that almost every district, every network has different student information systems, different rostering, different ways to plug in with different things. So that's another thing we've been doing. We have this partnership with the NWEA MAP where we call this the MAP accelerator, where for the districts and the schools that have been participating, the MAP acts as a diagnostic, as personalized practice for Khan Academy. And so they also are all fully rostered, and they get a dashboard, and they get the dashboard not just on usage of Khan Academy, but they can see the correlations between the Khan Academy work and growth on MAP, which is pretty cool, because it's like running an efficacy study every 4 months. So yeah, but that's a good question, and I want to accelerate some of that work if we can.
Great. Now I know we're running out of time here. Just a few more minutes, a few more questions. I'd love to ask you a little bit about envisioning the future. So, what is the future of public education from your view? And we know that public education is a big behemoth. Do you have any advice on how we can steer this behemoth in a better direction for all students?
So I'll give you the answer I would have said like 2 months ago, and then I'll modify it. I think the goal where we all want to go is a world, a lot of the reason why so many students are struggling, especially high need students, is it's not their ability level. It's not the subject matter. It's not that they're not having access to good teachers. It's that you could be a great teacher, but if the kids are showing up with significant gaps from 2-3 years ago, it's very hard, especially when those gaps are different for all 30 kids in the room. And, I would like systemically to move to what I call the Tim Vanderberg model. And many teachers have been doing this, but he's front of mind because I've talked to him recently, where, he works with 6th graders, a very high need community, 90% free reduced lunch, 90% well below grade level. His median student is like 3 grade levels behind when he gets them. And what he does is kind of what we just described. He has all of his 6th graders start on the arithmetic course on Khan Academy. So it literally starts at 1 + 1, but if they know that, they can move through it really fast to make sure they have a strong foundation. And simultaneously, he sets goals through the year for them to master the 6th grade content. And then he is there to, unblock students, do deeper interactions, pair them up so they can peer teach each other. And he's seen his results kind of, go off the charts. He's gone from 90% of his kids are well below grade level to 90% of his kids are above grade level. And they're all good. When they go to the middle school, they're all like, well, these kids are great. Like, give us more of these. They're ready they're ready to move ahead. And this is with a very high need population. So it's, anyone who thinks that it can't be done in some of these populations, talk to Tim Vandenberg. And there's many others. I know there's many in this community who are doing some incredible work. So I've always said, and I wrote a book. I mean, I'm not, since One World School, I have a copy here. I normally don't plug a book, but since it's here, I'll show it. Where I did kind of see, like, what could it look like, ideally? And it would be a world where, some things are not tech related. School is year round. So I saw a comment someone put on the message board that school should be, 24/7, 365. And I would say whole life too. And it shouldn't be bound by time and space. At least learning should not be bound by time and space. People should be able to learn at their own time and pace. It should be competency based versus just were you there? It should be did you and how you learned it maybe is there's more agency, more choice there. I think in the world we're living in now, all of that stuff I think becomes even more important, because we are in a world we don't know what seat the kid is in and how much time they're spending in it. What we do need to do, though, is have some mechanism to understand where they need to get to and what are their goals and how do we measure it and the accountability. But if a student doesn't get there by some preordained time, it's not, we shouldn't just discount them and throw them into the kind of like not so good bucket. We should say, look, keep going, keep trying at it. And then if that could happen, and then people are able to prove, I know a lot of people are struggling. How do you give kids credit in this world? How do you, I was talking to David Coleman, president of the College Board, yesterday about how they're going to handle AP tests. These are really interesting questions, but I think they're going to get us to a world where we think about, okay, there is a way for a student to be able to prove competency at any time, maybe, or multiple times with multiple opportunities. That would be the best way to approach it. I think, the way I see what happens over the next, let's call it 18 months is, and my read, I'm not an epidemiologist, but my best sense of what's going to happen is, knock on wood, things are going to start getting a little bit better next week. But that still doesn't mean we get out of this stay in place type of situation, because as soon as we got out of it, the disease will come back, or the virus will start spreading again. And so, we're going to need better testing and what everyone's talking about. But there's a very real possibility that we loosen up a little bit here or there, and then as we get into the fall, we go exponential again, and we have to shut down either in certain geographies or even nationwide. And so I think entering into this very uncertain world, the ideal use case is when school is in session in kind of normal ways, that teachers and schools are able to leverage tools like Khan Academy to have students learn at their own pace as a strategic supplement, fill in gaps. Maybe it's 20% of the learning time in the classroom. But then if school does have to be closed with like literally a few days notice, everyone's equipped. Everyone knows the process. Everyone's got the goal. Everyone's got the pacing guide, everything, so that it's suboptimal when you don't have the physical school. We've talked about all the things you're missing, but at least everyone can feel confident that the kids will keep progressing in some of these core areas: math, reading, writing. And some of the reading and writing, it doesn't even have to be high tech. We've started to release some English and language arts work, but if they just read a book and once a week, twice a week, they have a conversation about it, or there's some journaling and they have to write essays and they just take a picture and send it to their teacher. If what I've been telling people, if you can do like 2 hours, 3 hours a day of that type of really core reading, writing, arithmetic type work, kids are going to be okay. And then you could layer more on it, especially for older kids, middle and high school kids, age kids. You could do your biology, chemistry, physics, but even there, you put a lot on them to have that agency. I saw, when I was talking about my 5-year-old mopping, I saw someone had posted that they have trouble getting their 16-year-old to mop. And, once again, I don't want to jinx myself because none of my kids are teenagers, and I've heard a lot of stories. And I remember myself as a teenager. I was the lead singer in a heavy metal band, so you can imagine I was not, I was a little rebellious. So I definitely understand that. But I also think that teenagers, part of their rebellion comes from, they are proto-adults, and in a traditional system, we don't give them enough responsibility. And then that manifests itself in other ways. They want to exert their adulthood. And I think we should give them a ton of responsibility, especially over themselves. Like, here are goals, do them, and here's accountability, your choice. And at first they might kind of like, oh, wow, I could just hang out and, play video games. But I think what you see is when you give them that, when you put it on them and they see that you are serious about it and like your choice, your life, I've seen more often than not, they do step up. It's scary. It's scary as an educator or as a parent. And you sometimes might have to give them a nudge or find a cousin that can, someone who's not the parent to kind of nudge them. Like, are you sure you want to run your life this way? Like, let's extrapolate how this is all going to turn out. But if they can figure it out themselves, it can be a really, really valuable thing. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting times the next 18 months. But the way I think about it is, and I know a lot of folks on this webinar, the charter community, and there are people beyond the charter community. These are the folks, to your question, who they've wanted to reimagine what could be. And I think it's in a situation like this, it's super suboptimal, super crappy situation the whole world is in, but it's also an opportunity because people are in need of solutions. And you're not competing against the inertia of tradition, because kind of everything's gone out the door for at least the next 5 months and maybe longer. And so I would use this time to really just experiment, innovate. People have low expectations right now, so you can only do better than that. And so there's an opportunity.
That's a very good point. And I know we're pretty much out of time, but one final question. What do you personally find challenging about working from home or working in a virtual environment?
Well, if I'm honest, it's actually the kids being. I mean, you're trying to record a video or, and they're screaming in the next room. It's not easy. It's not easy. I've actually gotten better. Meditation helps across the board, because you're just like, it's how wonderful. Birds are chirping. My 5-year-old is screaming. That's life. Like, that is, I should embrace that. I should, I think it's I think there's that. I have to admit, I am, even though I'm good at pretending to be an extrovert, I am an introvert at heart. And so I mean, you can imagine, I spent many years in a walk-in closet, like literally seeing no one. And so there's a little part of me that my introverted side that it's it's definitely quieter to do kind of uninterrupted work. But yeah, I would say the meditation. I would say don't watch the news. This is what I've been telling my mom. My mom's been just watching the news constantly. She's by herself in New Orleans. I'm super worried about her, but like I'm like, don't watch the news. I'm actually more worried about her mental health than her. I mean, I'm worried about her physical health as well because she's watching the news. She's getting worked up, stressed out. I'm like, don't watch the news, meditate, and just have as much interaction with us and her grandchildren and et cetera as possible is the best advice I can think of.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you again, Sal, for joining us. This was an incredible opportunity. We so appreciate you. So thank you again. And we're going to go ahead and wind down here. So thank you, listeners, for joining us as well. So we do encourage you to stay in touch. We'll be back here again next week, continuing our keynote series on Wednesday, April 15th at 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Pacific, with Jamie Cassip, Chief Education Evangelist at Google. Jamie is an incredible speaker. He's got some really incredible tips on how to move virtual and how to continue to be engaging. So let's continue the conversation next week. And thank you again to everyone that joined, and a big thanks to Sal Khan for joining us today. Thank you all. We'll see you next week. And please make sure to continue to check our website and register for next week's webinar at publiccharters.org/webinars. Thank you again.